Introduction. Over the years, many people have sat across from me with the same quiet question, though they rarely ask it the same way. Some say it with frustration. Some say it with embarrassment. Some whisper it, as if speaking it too loudly might confirm their worst fear. Why do I feel everything so deeply? They are not asking because they enjoy feeling deeply. They are asking because it has become heavy, because emotions linger longer than expected, because joy can be overwhelming and pain can feel endless. Because they replay conversations in their minds long after everyone else has moved on. Because they notice shifts in mood, tone, silence, things others seem to walk past without a second thought. Often, they have already tried to fix themselves before they ever seek understanding. They have told themselves to be tougher, calmer, less emotional. They have practiced swallowing reactions. They have learned how to smile while feeling unsettled inside. Many have been told, directly or indirectly, that they are too much. Too sensitive, intense, zero are emotional. So they come not looking for celebration, but for relief. They want to know how to stop feeling the way they do. What they rarely consider, at least not at first, is that nothing is wrong with them. I want to say this gently, because for some people it takes time to let it sink in. Feeling deeply is not a defect. It is not a weakness. It is not something that needs to be erased. It is a way of experiencing life. I have listened to people who feel joy so strongly it brings them to tears over small moments. A song, a memory, a quiet kindness. I have listened to others who carry sadness in their bodies long after the reason has faded, unable to explain why their chest still feels heavy. I have spoken to individuals who can sense tension before words are spoken, who feel drained after social interactions without understanding why, who love deeply and grieve deeply and think deeply. And almost all of them share one thing in common. They have spent years misunderstanding themselves. This book is not here to teach you how to feel less. It is here to help you understand what you are feeling, why you feel it, and how to live well with it, without shame, without suppression, and without losing yourself in the process. If you feel everything deeply, you may have noticed that the world does not always accommodate your inner experience. The pace is fast. Expectations are loud. Emotional restraint is often rewarded more than emotional honesty. You may have learned early on that your way of feeling did not fit neatly into the environments you found yourself in. So you adapted. You became quieter or more agreeable. You learned to read rooms carefully. You anticipated needs before they were voiced. You held back parts of yourself to avoid being misunderstood. Adaptation is not failure. It is intelligence. But when adaptation goes on for too long without understanding, it can turn inward and become self-criticism. I have seen people confuse emotional depth with emotional instability. They are not the same. Feeling deeply does not mean you are incapable of regulation. It does not mean you are fragile or irrational. Often, it means your internal world is rich, layered, and responsive. You process information, especially emotional information, thoroughly. That thoroughness, however, can become exhausting without guidance. This is where many deep feelers begin to struggle, not because they feel too much, but because they have never been taught how to hold what they feel. They absorb, they analyze, they replay, they carry. Over time, this can lead to overwhelm, anxiety, emotional fatigue, or the sense that life is simply heavier for them than it seems to be for others. If this resonates, I want you to know something important. Your experience is valid, and it is shared by more people than you realize. Many of the individuals I have counseled spent years believing they were alone in this. They thought everyone else had received a manual for life that they somehow missed. They believed other people were better equipped for the world, while they were simply too affected by it. Understanding changes that narrative. When people begin to understand their emotional makeup, something subtle but powerful happens. They stop fighting themselves. They stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What do I need?" This book is designed to guide you toward that shift. You will not find quick fixes here. Emotional depth cannot be managed with surface-level advice. Instead, we will move slowly, thoughtfully, and honestly. We will talk about where emotional intensity comes from, how it develops, and how it shows up in relationships, work, creativity, and self-image. We will examine the cost of feeling deeply, and also its quiet strengths. Most importantly, we will explore how to build a life that does not require you to constantly numb, harden, or apologize for who you are. You may notice that this book speaks to you directly. That is intentional. When people talk about their inner lives, they rarely speak in abstractions. They speak in memories, sensations, and moments they could never quite explain before. I will often draw from those moments, not because one story fits everyone, but because recognition is a powerful teacher. As you read, you may find yourself pausing. Certain sentences may feel uncomfortably familiar. Others may bring relief. Take your time. This is not a book to rush through. Emotional understanding unfolds best when it is allowed to breathe. There is no requirement to change who you are by the end of these pages. The goal is not transformation into someone less sensitive, less responsive, or less emotionally aware. The goal is integration, learning how to live as a whole person, with your depth intact and your footing steadier. If you have ever felt like your emotions make life harder instead of richer, this book is for you. If you have ever been told to calm down when you were simply feeling honestly, this book is for you. If you have ever wondered why you seem to experience everything more intensely than the people around you, this book is for you. You are not too much. You have been carrying too much, without the right language, tools, or permission to understand yourself fully. That is what we begin to change here. Let us start by understanding what it truly means to feel everything deeply. Chapter It means to feel everything deeply. It happens there is a moment that many of us talk to me with a kind of silent baffling. It normally occurs during a normal day. There is nothing dramatic that has taken place, no obvious crisis. And yet, something tiny, a remark, a glance, a memory triggers off a wave in them that seems to be out of proportion to the time. Their response is, "I do not know why this happened to me so much." In order to experience, something fully tends to manifest itself in the manner. Not with continual emotional turmoil, but with intensity where others would hardly be sensitive. Even a word or two will remain in your mind even after it had been said. An act of kindness makes you warm up hours. A depressing story, even one that has nothing to do with your life, is in your chest, as though it were your own. This intensity of emotion can be hard to illustrate to one who is not in it. Externally, it might appear to be overreaction. On the inside, it is a sense of honesty. It is not like your emotional system is not doing its job in a thorough manner. Most of the deeply feeling individuals take years to figure out when they were born this way. They turn their memories upside down, in search of a turning point, a one-time event that would be the key to everything. Yet never really a moment is born of emotion. On more occasions, it is an outcome of how an individual has been taught to see the world, perceive it, and react to it. Being emotional does not imply that you are always emotional. Actually, even some of the deepest feelers are externally nonchalant. They can be calm, considerate, even shy. Their intensity is inward, where they are allowed to work their emotions out in full and are not expressed, except possibly. This is among the most misconceived elements of emotional depth. Human beings believe that emotional individuals are dramatic or impulsive. In reality, many are careful. They think before they speak. They take into account the effect of their words. They experience the burden of circumstances and individuals way before they take action. I once heard a man say that he could tell when other men were disappointed before they even uttered a word. He referred to it as a slight change. There was something in the air, a hesitation that was an extra half-second. He was taught at a tender age to adapt himself to avoid inconvenience, and in the process, he sacrifices his needs. He was tired, but he did not know why when he was already a man. He had been emotionally sensitive to other people for years, but he did not know how costly the sensitivity was. The only way to experience everything is not to perceive emotions as signaling messages, but all the way through. You do not merely feel sad, you investigate sadness. You do not merely feel happy, you live in it. Both your mind and body are involved, making meaning and seeking patterns, questioning, why did this affect me? What does it say about me? What does it mean about them? Such a tendency to be reflective is not casual. Deep feelers usually have a high inner consciousness. They notice nuance. They register shifts. Their emotional compass is finely tuned, and it picks up some things that the other people will not detect. There is no such thing as sensitivity in solitude. It is in contact with the environment, upbringing, and personal history. Other individuals grew up in families where emotions were high and uncontrollable, and they were therefore compelled to be emotionally alert. Some other people have been brought up in a setting where they have been taught to suppress their emotions, making them to keep the emotions within themselves. The depth of the emotions in both instances was a way of safely negotiating the world. With time, what starts as awareness may be habitual. You are taught to scan emotionally. You anticipate reactions. You plan in advance what is going to occur. And since you are so fully experienced in feeling, such processes are extreme. This intensity usually goes hand in hand with weakness, particularly in societies that uphold emotional restraint. It is also itemized or said explicitly that many deep feelers need to harden up. They are taught to equate emotional receptiveness to weakness and weakness to threat, so they are mindful of themselves. They minimize the reactions, they downplay the feelings, they explain themselves within a short period of time so that they will not be misunderstood, and still, the feelings are there, they always are. It is not that deep feelers feel too much. The thing is that they are most of the times told to feel unguided, languageless, and devoid of support. They are abandoned to deal with a lush emotional world alone, without instruments of control and limits. This is the point at which the confusion sets in. Emotions may be overwhelming when they seem to be strong and not controlled. Human beings start questioning whether their emotional system is out of order. They are equated to others that appear healthy and unimpeded, strong and stable. However, what they are comparing is not the capacity to feel and process, but to express and process emotionally. There are individuals who are fast and quick-tempered. They are digested by others slowly and internally. Neither is superior. They are simply different. Deep feelers are likely to work out emotions and then expel them. This may be strength, which means understanding, sympathy, and meaningful connection. However, in the absence of such understanding, it may also cause rumination, exhaustion, and self-doubt. I can say that to many, most of the time. Your emotions are not out to sabotage you. They are trying to inform you. However, when the information is received in bulk, without a structure on how to interpolate it, they may seem like noise rather than guidance. The first thing to realize to be able to turn such noise into clarity is what it is like to feel on a deep level. Reading this book will also lead you to notice that your emotional life is not as random as it used to be. You'll know what causes you to feel more drained than others, and why some relationships weigh you down, and why you take things so seriously when other people shrug their shoulders. This is not the knowledge of identifying oneself and putting oneself in a box. It is of providing your experience a name, a context, and a place to sleep. In the following chapter, we will look under the surface, at the internal processes that influence emotional intensity. We'll look at how the brain, nervous system, and emotional processing interact to create the experience of deep emotion. For the time being, it is sufficient to recognize that feeling passionately about things is not something you developed by mistake. It is a reaction to how you have learned to function in the world. And once you realize this, everything that was previously unclear begins to make sense. Chapter 2, The Inner Mechanism of Emotional Strength. Once individuals start believing that being emotional is a part of how they are wired, the question that is likely to follow is the next one. Why am I wired this way? Not merely out of curiosity, it is an important question. A lot of individuals are covertly wishing to be reassured. They desire to understand, is there a cause of their emotional intensity, something concrete, something solid, something grounded, that they may no longer take it as a failure of themselves. I have experienced the relief of knowing that someone feels that his or her emotional experience is not an accident. There exists an internal system, that what they experience is structured, although it has never seemed to be orderly. To learn more about emotions, we must discuss the flow of emotions in the body and the mind. Not technology, but humanity. Your emotional system can be seen as a messenger within. To others, messages come across and pass by in a short period of time. To others, messages are received with information, background, and feelings. They remain long enough to be viewed in various perspectives. Neither system is broken. They just work at various levels of sensitivity. The nervous system is at the center of this experience. It is the network that defines the intensity of registering stimulation, and this includes emotional stimulation. Certain nervous systems are hyperirritable in nature. They are fast in their response, sensitive to slight changes, and are alert. This does not imply that they are not working. It means they are attentive. Emotionally sensitive nervous systems tend to pick up on things that other people do not notice. A slight change in tone. a shift in body language, the emotional underpinning of a room. These are signals that are processed instantly and, in some circumstances, before one can even think of them. That is why a good number of deep feelers say, "I feel it and I cannot explain it." Their bodies process emotional data more quickly than their mind is able to make sense of it. I once had to work with a lady who said that as she got into the office every morning, she felt anxious even though nothing had gone wrong on those days. She thought that she was just a nervous individual. With time, she realized that her nervous system was reacting to the small environmental stressors, tension amongst coworkers, implicit norms she was subconsciously reading between the lines, emotional tunes. She was not irrational in her anxiety. It was raw information. Brain also contributes to the intensity of the feeling of emotions. The brains of some people are more reflective and meaning-making. They experience, not simply but interpolate events. They look in search of meaning. They inquire what something is telling them, others, and what it is telling them about the future. This predilection to profundity is confused with overthinking. And better to say that it is complete processing. The mind of a deep feeler does not just receive something emotional and pass on. It revisits it. It turns it over. It looks at the emotional coloring of the experience. That is why a conversation may take over you thoughts days. It is not due to the desire of your mind. It is working on it still. People who are emotional also have a stronger emotional memory. Emotions are not only recorded in the form of events, but also as sensations. Not only what happened, but how it felt in the body, the tightness, the warmth, the heaviness can be restored by a memory. That is why emotional experiences may seem that they are still there even after their completion. To most deep feelers, this is a confounding relationship with time. In the emotional sense, the past does not necessarily remain in the past. It recurs upon being activated by something familiar, a sound, a phrase, a look. The nervous system irritates that the experience is being repeated. People do not know how this process works, hence they tend to blame themselves of not letting go. But letting go is not something that is determined by a delicate nervous system. It is a process. Empathy is also another crucial aspect of emotional intensity. Those who are deep feelers do not think of empathy as an idea, but as an experience. They are not merely aware of how another person feels, but they experience it with them. This emotional appeal may be strong. It permits profound closeness, empathy, and wisdom, but it is also that emotional space can be crossed so easily. Stress, sadness, or anger of other people can be picked up without much effort. This may build up with time, causing emotional overload. Individuals in this job frequently complain that they are tired without having any clue as to the reason. Even when they did not talk much, they might walk away after the conversation feeling heavy. They can be unable to pinpoint their feelings and feelings of other people. Again, this is not weakness. It is perceptiveness and lack of filtering. A lot of emotionally rich people did not learn how to filter emotional intake. They were trained to accept and not to give back. They had learned to see, not how to guard. This responsiveness might have worked in their favor as children. It could have assisted them to predict needs, prevent conflict, or remain emotionally attached to key persons. However, over time, the same thing that has been of benefit on them starts to wear them out. This knowledge takes the story to a new turn. Rather than saying, "Why is it that I am like this?" the question is, "What has my system learnt to do? Why?" This reframing is strong as it eliminates judgment. It enables inquisition to substitute censure. It also reveals the reason why deep feelers have difficulty working in places that require them to deliver emotions without taking breaks. Loud spaces, high-pressure workplaces, weak communication relationships. These circumstances are too many to handle a system that is supposed to handle on a very meticulous and thoughtful manner. When individuals who have emotionally sensitive systems are compelled to act like they are not so sensitive, they mostly suffer burnout, and they are weary of uneasiness, which sleep cannot heal. They can withdraw not because they are antisocial, but because their system has to be quietened down so that it can be recalibrated. When one realizes this, then self-care ceases to be luxurious, but rather essential. All this does not imply that emotions cannot be controlled. It can. Regulation does not consist in oppression. It is a product of knowledge of how your inner clock is functioning and acting accordingly. Consider how emotional depth typically begins early in life, and how childhood experiences, family relationships, and early emotional surroundings influence how feelings are processed and carried into adulthood. Because, while biology establishes the stage, experience dictates much of the narrative. Understanding that script allows you to live with emotional depth, rather than being ruled by it. Chapter 3, The Genesis of Emotional Depth. Majority of individuals who experience everything strongly believe that they were born that way. And in some ways, that is true. Yet no emotional profundity is often merely a question of temperament. It is formed, strengthened, and polished by the experience at early age, what you had to attend to, what you had to conduct, what you learned to be safe to feel. When I make people think about their childhood, they are as if reluctant. But not because something awful occurred, but because they do not know what should count as a big enough thing to count. They want something dramatic to tell. Trauma, obvious neglect, clear emotional damage, yet there need not be dramatic beginnings to emotional depth. Sometimes it begins quietly. A child who learns early to read the emotional atmosphere of a room, or who feels tension in advance before voices get raised, or who learns to be sensitive to moods due to the feeling of insecurity associated with uncertainty. These children become adults being sensitive, not because they are weak, but because they were taught at a tender age that emotional sensitivity is important. I had once talked to a man who said that his home growing up was mostly fine. His parents provided for him. There was food on the table, school was stable, but still he was brought up in an emotionally uneasy manner. It took him years to acknowledge the fact that the emotions of his parents were unpredictable. Some days they were warm, other days withdrawn, no explanation, no warning. He was trained as a child to keep an eye on minute changes. He learned to be able to read when he needed to talk and when to remain silent. This vigilance had become natural by the time that an individual was an adult. He was sensitive to emotions as he had learned that information existed in emotions and information that used to make him feel secure. In other cases, an emotional depth is formed in the setting where feelings are refuted. Children who are not allowed to cry, not to be dramatic, not to be sensitive, go inward. They experience everything but privately, without guidance, without validation. These children are taught that it is dangerous to express their emotions, so they process alone. They are caring, people who look deep inside themselves and become conscious of their inner worlds. What many people overlook is that there is also the possibility of emotion depth in environments which are laid with emotional chaos or those which are emotionally silent. In one, the child gets to know how to follow emotions to endure instability. In the other, the child acquires to internalize emotions since they do not have space to do so. In both situations, there is adaptation of the nervous system. Attachment is also a very important factor. The safety of feeling, expressing, and depending is taught to our early relationships. When the regularity of the fulfillment of emotional needs, the feelings will shift in the system more freely. The experiences that they receive irregularly or none can be extreme, continuous, and hard to discharge. This is not an indication that the caregivers did not fail out of intent. Most of them did their best with what they had. But children are not judging will. They are acting in reaction to experience. When love was conditional, it was something to be handled with. The thing was that care was not consistent, and vigilance was a survival skill. In case the expression was not promotion, depth was internalized. With time, these patterns are entrenched through personality traits. What was a reaction now became an identity. I'm just sensitive. I've always been emotional. I have a more emotional heart than the rest. These words might seem real, but there is usually a deeper narrative, one of adjustment and not failure. Responsibility is the other similarity between deep feelers. At a tender age, many were emotionally accountable towards other people. They cajoled, compromised, or took emotional burdens not in their own right. They were taught to occupy space prior to learning how to defend their own. This premature burden is capable of producing adults who are unbelievably understanding and weak on boundaries. They experience everything due to the fact that they have been needed. And yet, very few people can ever explain them that this is not a flaw. The fact that their emotional richness was acquired through reaction to actual circumstances. That it once served a purpose. This is a relief and a disturbing idea to understand. It is a reprieve that you did not create your emotional intensity. It is unsettling to discover the extent of the time you have been holding practices of a kind that are no longer beneficial to you. There are worries that by looking into their past, some people will get stuck there. As a matter of fact, it is the knowledge of your emotional roots that liberates you by repeating them non-consciously. This is not about blame. It is about clarity. When individuals start observing the way their emotional systems have evolved, they no longer want to know why they cannot just be different. They realize that change is not a result of coercion. It is informed by consciousness and decision-making. Your emotional richness did not appear in no time. It was developed in reaction to your world. This profundity is often developed in terms of empathy and intuition, how emotion deep means emotion on behalf of others, sometimes with great self-peril. Since the perception of the point of emotional depth is half the battle, the most noticeable effect can be seen in understanding it as it goes beyond you to encompass relations with others. Chapter 4: Compassion, Intuition, and the Burden of Other People Feeling. Caring about people is a certain exhaustion, but not knowing how much you are carrying with you. It is not always that many deep feelers call themselves empathetic. They explain it by saying that they just pick things up or they know when something is wrong. They discuss intuition as being accidental, something that occurs to them and not something they have. But with time, a tendency is apparent. They feel the changes even before they have to speak. They experience the strain that is neglected by other people. They realize when one is in trouble, even when the person claims that he or she is okay. This is not imagination. It is emotional attunement. In the simplest understanding, empathy is the capacity to have experience of another person. In the case of most deep feelers, empathy does not stop at that. It becomes resonance. They do not tend to know how one feels. They experience it in their bodies. One of the women once informed me that when her friend cried, her chest would restrict that she was the one who was crying. She was exhausted by protracted dialogue even when she said very little. She would walk out of a room with the feeling of being heavy without understanding, why only to understand later that the surrounding people were experiencing stress that they were not even talking about. She thought she was weak. In truth, she was permeable. This type of empathy is usually followed by intuition. Once you have been paying close attention to emotional cues over the years, your mind starts to pick up patterns fast. You know when something is out of place. There are discrepancies between actions and words that you observe. You experience something unfinished, unresolved, or unspoken. This may appear as outside wisdom. On the inside, it is like being looked at all the time. This challenge comes in when empathy and intuition have unchecked operations. Emotional information is piled up when there is no outlet to discharge it. Deep feelers start supporting emotional loads, which are not theirs. They internalize stress since they are able to feel the stress. They accept responsibility on moods since they are able to experience them. They remain available to others at the expense of rest, clarity, or tranquility. This often begins early. Children who were taught to expect emotional changes among their caregivers end up being adults who expect the same thing among partners, friends, and colleagues. The skill is transferred without facing any problem, but the cost is expensive. With the course of time, empathy is transformed to expectation. Citizens get used to presence, insight, and emotional availability of the deep feeler. The deep feeler, on the other hand, finds it hard to explain why he/she is exhausted, why he/she is overwhelmed, why he/she requires space. The space requirement may seem like a betrayal to those who are accustomed to being on the side of understanding. It is in this that many deep feelers are confused. They genuinely care. They want to be present. And still, they are overwhelmed by emotional contributions that they did not make. It is not the issue of empathy. The issue is uncouth compassion. Emotional information flows inward without conscious limits and will never flow outward. It does not have any mechanism of release. No emotional sorting. All this is absorbed as equally significant. This results in an erosion of self, albeit faintly. Individuals start losing the balance between their feelings and feelings of other people. They say, "we," when they mean you. They are ashamed of the necessity to rest. They doubt that they have a right to retire. I have observed how people have been caught in the trap of thinking that emotional availability is equal to non-stop availability. That caring means carrying, but empathy does not presuppose self-abandonment. Even intuition, when conceived improperly, turns to be a burden. You might not trust yourself, when you feel that something is wrong but you cannot prove it. You may stay silent. You wait until you are proved wrong. In the long run, this conditioning is passed on to the deep feelers to doubt themselves. They get to learn to subjugate their instincts to the cause of harmony, clarity, or peacekeeping. They put in blindly to the point of exhaustion. It brings a painful paradox to it. The more intuitive and empathetic a person is, the more he/she tends to doubt himself, spreads doubts. It is vital to learn about this dynamic, due to the inability to remove such flaws as emotional depth, empathy, and intuition. They are abilities that can be handled. When individuals are taught to tell the difference between awareness and responsibility, all things start to change. Without assimilating, you can observe. Carrying is unnecessary to understand. You need not nurture and fall into the emotional realm of another person. This difference does not occur naturally. It must be learned. And to most deep-seated persons, it is novel, even wrong. Demonstrating the emotional boundaries is chilly. It is egoistic to take a step back. It may seem like abandonment to leave someone alone with his/her feelings. Yet it is not, it is balance. When the emotional depth is not managed, when it is overwhelming, persistent, and exhausting, until the emotional depth is a strength, we should first realize how it can cost us when not kept under control. It is only after this that we can start learning to live with it, without sacrificing ourselves in the process. Chapter 5. When emotions grow too burdened to bear, then there comes a place to which many deep feelers reach, and the question is not whether they feel deeply or not, but whether they can go on bearing what they feel. They do not come to this abruptly. It builds quietly. Some increased fatigue, which was not normal, a little less patience. There's a rising feeling that even minor things seem like excess. They can continue operating, working, caring, appearing, yet there is something in it that does not feel good. They say such things as, "I am tired all the time, but I am not sure why," or "I am overwhelmed, but nothing that is going wrong." This is what uncontrollable emotional depth usually appears to be. Emotions are not released properly, and when they are processed to a deep level, they accumulate. Every experience comes with a new dimension. The system gets saturated with time. What was once easy to bear starts weighing down. This gravity does not necessarily have to be dramatic. It may manifest itself in the form of the lack of cessation of mental activity, the inability to relax the body, or the impossibility to experience relaxation completely. A large number of deep feelers are kept in a low-grade condition of emotional alertness, which is in a constant state of slight bracing, in which they are always awaiting the next emotional demand. They might find it difficult to move past rumination, in which they replay the discussions, reconsider the decisions, reinterpret the emotional interaction even after it is over. This is not because they are on it, but it is due to the fact that their emotions are still in the process of doing the job. There is an incomplete emotional cycle that should be attended to. Anxiety is also apt to come in this entry, not as fear of certain occurrences, but as emotional congestion. The system feels full. Space is absent where new input can be introduced. Even good experiences can be exhausting in a situation where the emotional container is already congested. I once had someone that explained joy as being too loud. Even good news was something overwhelming. Celebrations felt like work. She did not comprehend why she did not take pleasure in things she used to adore. It was not the lack of gratitude or appreciation. It was emotional fatigue. The nervous system becomes too stiff when it has been bearing too much and too long. It becomes reactive. Small things feel big. Large things become unmanageable. It is at this point that deep feelers tend to get in their self-pathology. They believe that there is something wrong with their psychological stability. They fear that they are getting unstable, fragile, or unable to cope. Burnout is what is usually occurring, emotional burnout. In contrast to physical exhaustion, emotional burnout is more difficult to discover. Rest alone does not fix it. It is not alleviated by distraction. It remains long that the root of the problem has not been tackled. This is especially sensitive to deep feelers, which are inclined to plow through pain. They are used to internal tension. They make emotionally heavy things normal. They say that they are capable of it until they are unable. Emotional flooding is another typical experience at this stage. Emotions hitherto repressed are spewed out. Tears come unexpectedly. Frustration comes up fast. Even to the individual being affected, emotional reactions are unproportional. This failure of control is dreadful to most deep feelers. They boast of composure. Once that composure is lost, they are ashamed. But flooding is not failure. It is a signal. It is an indicator of system surpassing capacity. What most individuals will do at this stage is the attempt to take back the power by further driving emotion away. They tighten. They numb. They distract. They push harder. This can be temporary, but this does not alleviate the accumulation. It only delays the release. This moment is significant to understand, since it is here that oftentimes the person determines that he/she is being too emotional and starts attempting to reform themselves in manners that further worsen the issue. Rather than inquiring, how do I get myself to stop feeling this way? The question is more helpful. What has my system been bearing out of unsupported? There is no emotional overwhelm as a weakness. It is a logical consequence of the continuous emotional stress without proper limits, processing, or rest. This chapter is by no means to take alarm. It is supposed to be a normalization of what most deep feelers do but seldom refer to. The fact that you have identified yourself here does not imply that you are broken. It is that your emotional depth has not been supported. Next, in the following chapter, we would consider one of the spheres in which emotional complexity tends to be the trickiest, namely, relationships. Since although deep feelers offer unmatched attention and presence to their relationships, the same traits can also be the major cause of strains in the relationships. This is a dynamic that needs to be understood not to disconnect, but to be in it more sustainably. Chapter 6: Loving deeply, hurting deeply. Relationships are not casual things to people who experience everything. They are immersive. They matter. They leave marks. Lots of deep feelers are able to trace their ultimate pleasures and their saddest traumas to relationship, not owing to their decision to feel so much, but owing to the ability to feel connected. When they love to the full extent. They perceive changes in intimacy. They feel changes in tone. They feel alienated even before there is a word. Such a degree of sensitivity may form an intense closeness. It also has the ability to generate vulnerability. This, as one of the most common things I hear of deep feelers, is I love more than any other people appear to love. They are actually talking about investment and not excess. They are at an emotional level. They listen carefully. They remember details. They are in charge of the emotional well-being of the relationship. Once one has a feeling of security in a relationship, it turns into a nest of warmth and significance. It becomes the source of distress when it is not known. Deep feelers are very sensitive to inconsistency, mixed signals, unspoken expectations, emotional withdrawal. These fail to take note as minor concerns. They feel destabilizing. The delayed message may also result in a spiral of interpretation. Any alteration of a routine may be as rejection. Silence can feel loud. This is not that deep feelers are needy and insecure intrinsically. This is often the case, and it implies that they are sensitive to emotional signals and they find it difficult when they are ambiguous. Most people have been taught, either knowingly or unknowingly, that connection is something that one needs to be on guard about. That intimacy may be taken away anytime. Being a listening person is a defense. This makes them be excessive in relationships. They contribute to the greater good. They accommodate. They adjust. They have a preemptive explanation. The loss is not merely extrinsic when a relationship is terminated or changed. It is internal. It interferes with their emotional balance. Deep feelers tend to mourn relationships at times. They lament about what was, what might have been, and what they pictured. The emotional processing requires time. It is only by rushing that it will increase the pain. This is where most of them are misconstrued. Friends can say, "It is time to move on," or "It is time to get over it." But moving on is not a switch. It is a process. The other problem that deep feelers encounter in relationships is the inability to be understood. Their expressiveness of emotions can be termed as too much to their partners with different ways of processing. Their pressure can be construed as need of clarity. Their wish to discuss things can be taken as intensity. This may result in self-silencing in the long run. Deep feelers start concealing themselves so as to be at peace. They downplay feelings. They apologize for needs. The message that deeply loving is a burden is internalized in them. This is a painful distortion. Depth is not the problem. Mismatch is. When emotional styles are not the same, the conflict does not occur due to the fact that one party is wrong. Instead, the conflict occurs because the needs and processing speeds are not matched. Unconsciously, these distinctions may cause a series of chases and retreat, misinterpretation, and hatred. Deep feelers commonly get into the relationships where they become the emotional anchor. They hold space. They are the ones who start a conversation. They repair ruptures. They keep things together. Although this may be fulfilling, it may be tiresome. In the long run, they might feel ignored, unassisted, or assumed. This trend is not to be blamed. It is about discernment. Not all relationships are able to fulfill a deep feeler there. And that is not a failure. It is information, education in evaluating emotional compatibility, and not attraction or shared values is important in emotional sustainability. The next field we will change attitudes to is where the emotional richness tends to make or break brilliance and strain. Work, creativity, and contribution. Since it is the sensitivity that makes relationships difficult but can also make them insightful, committed, and excellent when it is comprehended and encouraged. Yet, it should be said straight out first. Chapter 7: Work, Imagination, and the Mute Challenge of Care. There's a common idea that emotional richness is a part of personal life, whereas work is another world which is ruled by logic, productivity, and detachment. Deep feelers soon become aware that this breakup is not going to be that easy. They bring their emotional consciousness into all the surroundings, and even the professional ones. They observe dancing when others do not. They feel the pressure even before it is pronounced. Their emotional sensations are on leadership, teams, and expectations. This to others renders work meaningful. To others, it causes it to be tiresome. Deep feelers usually take much concern with the quality of what they can produce. They do not merely go through with tasks, they make an investment. They add attention, intent, and emotional presence whether the work is a creative, relational, or technical work. This can be a strength. It can also become a burden. Deep feelers tend to be perfectionists, but not because they are demanding praise, but because it is emotionally uncomfortable to work on incomplete or careless work. The burden of responsibility is felt by them. They desire that their work will count. Even constructive criticism can be harmful and not forgettable. One negative comment can cover a chain of achievements. The emotional reaction of the feedback may be excessive not due to the incapability of the deep feeler to manage the critique, but due to the fact that the deeply emotional person absorbs the feedback. I once started talking about a comment of a supervisor that I made, and this person told me that it remained in their head several weeks. It was not harsh. It was brief, but it struck a deeper chord, one that was connected to identity, value, and contribution. This is when work intrudes on deep feelers, in spite of their wish. In some cases, especially creativity, emotional depth is the source of creativity. A number of deep feelers are writers, artists, thinkers, problem solvers. They are sensitive enough to pick up patterns, to make connections, and to be nuanced. However, creative depth is also creative exposure. Working together is sharing oneself. Denial or disapproval may seem like invalidation of a person. Deep feelers can be a challenge in a workplace where rapidity is of great concern, not depth. They can also feel hurried, unnoticed, or undermined. They may be confused to appear inefficient because they require time to reflect. Their need to have meaning can be regarded as not necessary. This lack of fit may result into disengagement. This may lead to withdrawal of emotions, as those people who care deeply shield themselves. They perform that which is necessary, but without the fire which used to run them. This withdrawal is misconstrued as laziness or lack of ambition, but in actual sense, it is self-preservation. Emotional labor at work is also likely to be absorbed by deep feelers. They mediate conflicts. They can feel when fellow employees are in trouble. They provide a helping hand, not always formally and unacknowledged. It is an accumulating, invisible work. It consumes power but fails to replenish. It is only when they become overwhelmed by the emotional burden that is placed on the work that many deep feelers will experience burning out, not because of the work, but due to the emotional burden. They are not only responsible of their work, but of the emotional climate surrounding them. It is important to understand this dynamic. At work, emotionalized does not vanish. It is just that it works by other rules. Work will become sustainable again when deep feelers know how to name their needs, boundaries, and find the environments that appreciate depth. However, in the absence of this realization, even purposeful work turns into an element of silent suffering. We shall deal with one of the most painful of all the things that deep feelers tend to lug about: shame at having been too much. Since no emotional depth can be fully welcomed before the internalized notion that it is a deficiency is investigated and discharged, then may depth be something to celebrate rather than conceal. Chapter 8: The shame of feeling too much. A certain type of silence is created around emotional depth. It is not that one has no feeling, but that one has no permission. Numerous deep feelers are raised learning, painfully, gradually, that their emotional reactions are inconvenient, not dangerous, not harmful, just excessive, too intense for the room, too heavy for the moment, too much to the people around them. The teaching is not often taught directly. It is expressed in sighs, those statements which are dismissive or even subtle withdrawal. You're overthinking. It's not that serious. You're too sensitive. These messages implant. Deep feelers start doubting not only their responses, but their entitlement to such responses. It is through this that shame becomes introduced into the emotional system, not as a sense of guilt about something wrong done, but rather as feeling uncomfortable about something sincerely. Shame conditions humans to conceal some of themselves in order to be acceptable. In the case of deep feelers, it can commonly entail the art of swallowing feeling, to filter responses, to seem even uninfluenced beyond the times they are. They are taught how to restrain emotions. This is a compelling performance. A large number of deep feelers grow up very useful people. They take care of duties. They support others. They appear composed. Within, however, there is usually a silent battle, a feeling that what is in the inner man must be handled, not a lauded experience. Shame has the most strength as it does not need to be enforced. After being internalized, it becomes automatic. Individuals end up censoring themselves even before any other person could. They say, "Is this too much to say?" They reason, "I should be all over with this by now." They say to themselves, "I am making something out of nothing." This self-correction is like maturity. In fact, it is a self-erasure in many cases. I have heard individuals who could describe the emotions of the entire universe eloquently, but who could not identify theirs or their own without conceding. They could easily do the validation of others, yet they did not extend the same benevolence on themselves. This lack of balance is not accidental. It is the outcome of a lifetime of being conditioned, unconsciously, that the emotional richness is something to keep in secret. This is supported by cultural expectations. In a variety of societies, stoicism, composure, and emotional efficiency are appreciated. When it is short, measured, and convenient, emotional expression is all that can be tolerated. Those whose feelings are slow and lingering, deep feelers, are out of harmony with these standards. They are trained to feel sorry about their speed, their demands, how they process things. This shame can be aggravated by gender expectations. Other people are made to feel that they are weak because they have a deep feeling. The rest are informed that they are dramatic. The message is different, but the effect is the same. Your emotional experience is not acceptable. This makes a bitter contradiction. Those very qualities which enable deep feelers to relate with each other, empathize, and comprehend become the cause of self-criticism. There is also distortion of perception by shame. You start to perceive things in that way when you feel that there is something wrong about yourself. Emotional responses are presented. Weariness becomes supposition. Difficulty becomes proof. It takes more than assurance to come out of this trend. It demands having a reformulation of the emotional depth not as overflow, but as being sensitive to history and context. When individuals start realizing the source of their emotional richness, the way it grew, what it used to defend, they will tend to encounter a change. When understanding replaces shame, the latter becomes weaker. It is not in this chapter that we are encouraged to simply express ourselves, blindly, everywhere. Emotional maturity does not go away. Maturity does not involve denying oneself. Regulation and suppression are different. Regulation respects emotion and directs the expression of emotion. Repression rejects feeling to ensure acceptance. Deep feelers have a lot of skill in suppression. What they should be taught is self-respect regulation. This shift will start in the following chapter. We shall see how to be full of emotions and not overwhelmed by them, how to control the intensity of emotions without diminishing its intensity. since less feeling does not heal. It is a result of feeling different, supported, understood, and at home with yourself. Chapter 9, Feeling without drowning. When emotional regulation is brought up by people with a deep feeling, they tend to misinterpret its request. They imagine restraint, control, the repression camouflaged as treatment. They believe that being a regulator is to become less emotional, less responsive, less self. It is upon such a mistake that many deep feelers have remained immobilized. Emotional regulation does not entail the process of closing down feelings. It has to do with learning how to remain present with what you experience without being taken by it. This distinction was never taught most deep feelers. They collected still only two ways: to feel everything passionately or to close everything really completely. There seldom was a compromise. When the emotions run high, then they either take up the brunt or attempt to run away. Both possibilities are unsustainable. One time I talked to a person who said that emotions are like waves. Either they fly over me, or I live my life running away out of the sea, she said. The technique of floating is what she was never taught. Regulation starts with a realization that emotions are not instructions. They are information. Hard information, yes, and yet information. They make you know that something is going on inside you, which should not be panicked. In case of deep feelers, it is difficult since feelings come in full blown. They do not trickle in. They announce themselves. They demand space. The error is to believe that you need to get an answer right away. Deep feelers are fast reacting since they are fast feeling. However, response is not equal to reaction. Reaction is automatic. Response is intentional. By learning to stop, even momentarily, there is a space to control. This pause is not silence. It is curiosity. Rather than posing, how should I make this stop? What this feeling asks, the question is what? Misery is possibly seeking rest. Anger can be demanding limits. Anxiety can be requesting safety or assurance. When left unattended or unheeded, the emotions grow out of proportion. They become soft when they are called by their right names. Language is one of the most effective instruments of deep feelers. Several of them possess abundant interior lives and poor emotional expressiveness. They are aware that they are bad, off, or overwhelmed, but these are too generalized to act upon. Feelings that are unnamed are not contained. Being able to tell emotions, the difference between disappointment and sadness, resentment and anger, grief and numbness is decreased. It provides the nervous system with clarity. The other important point of regulation is to permit the flow of emotions in the body. Deep feelers tend to be in their heads and it does not feel the emotions, but analyzes them. However, emotions are experienced realities. They require tangible recognition. When permitted to flow, tears relieve tension. Safety is indicated by deep breathing. Movement gets rid of unwanted emotional energy. Regulation occurs by way not only of thought, but of sensation. As a matter of importance, regulation does not imply that you have to have everything processed at once. Deep feelers are often under pressure to spend less time on emotions before proceeding to understand them, as they are being consumed. This pressure exerts additional pressure. Some emotions need time. Some need distance. Some require tenderness and not solutions. Regulation is about packing. Imagine that emotional capacity is a container. Being full, there will be no insight that will cause it to be bigger. Before you ask it to carry more, you must first empty it, by rest, or expression, or grounding. Most deep feelers find it hard at this point since they think that to endure is to be strong. They boast of the capacity they possess to carry. Strength, however, is not what one can take. It is how well you recover. Regulating emotions is all about learning to contribute and learning to withdraw. It involves the ability to see danger signs of being overwhelmed and acting on it before it floods. This skill takes practice. It might be unnatural initially, particularly to those who were taught at a tender age to transcend their wants. It is not policing that is treachery of yours. It is stewardship of it. It is not coldness to know where you start and others start. It is clarity. And sanity is what gives emotional meanings life instead of death. Chapter 10, Where You End and Others Begin. The word boundaries has an unpleasant ring to many individuals who are more than just for the moment. It sounds harsh, defensive. It seems to need being turned into a more distant, colder, less loving person. Millions of profoundly emotional individuals have continued to be left emotionally vulnerable much longer than they ought. Boundaries are not walls. They are definitions. They make it clear what is of you and what is not. They guard emotional energy such that the care is offered purposefully, not because it is a compulsive issue. Nobody ever told most deep feelers how to draw these lines. They were taught to adapt, expect, and internalize. Boundaries were either described inadequately or packaged as selfishness. Therefore, they were raised with a notion that being good was to be available, to a care, to love being to endure. It takes time to unlearn this. I was once approached by one of them who said, "Who will do it when I do not?" Their whole relationship life had been influenced by such a belief. They were the hearer, mender, and the heart hook, and they were exhausted. Boundaries start with consent, the consent to dissociate consciousness with accountability. It is possible to observe the pain of someone without getting involved in it. It is possible to care without rescuing. You may listen and not say a word. Such the difference is hard to come by in deep feelers, since emotional sensitivity is automatic. The emotion comes ahead of the decision. Boundaries are not concerned with the prevention of that arrival. They are concerning the course of action. Beyond limits, deep feelers fall upon self-erasure. They override discomfort. They silence needs. They convince themselves that it is more convenient to adapt than to justify. The result of this is resentment, silent, internal resentment, and shameful to confess. They express curiosity as to why they are annoyed with people they love, why the philanthropy has become cumbersome. One of the boundary signals that has been overlooked is resentment. It is important to learn how to pick up this signal. Being bitter does not imply that you are ungenerous. It implies that it is against choice to give. Emotional boundaries entail reaching out to yourself and then reacting, asking straightforward and powerful questions. Am I able to do this at the moment? Is it by choice I make this choice, or lapse to custom? To say yes, what would cost me? The presence of these questions slows down the automatic response. They establish space of purpose. Most of the deep feelers are afraid that boundaries will hurt relationships. As a matter of fact, vague boundaries hurt relationships way more. They cause disequilibrium, reliance, and unofficial obligations. Honesty is a result of clear boundaries. They enable connection to be made without self-sacrifice. Boundaries do not necessarily have to be explained. It is a hard thing to those who are inclined to feeling. They usually think that they have to explain their needs in details so that they can be comprehended. Limits are not debates. They are statements. I can't do that today. I want time to think. I have no strength to this at this time. These are not comfortable sentences. They defy established views on value and access. But after practice, they turn into self-respect. Significantly, boundaries will fail to satisfy individuals at times. This is unavoidable. However, the disappointment is not bad, and shunning it at all costs usually results in self-mutilation in more sedate ways. Deep feelers are forced to understand that being uncomfortable does not imply danger. The fact that the feelings of another person do not necessarily involve their interference. This is a learning process that is grief-inducing. Most of them can know how they have often left themselves to stay at peace. They grieve over the versions that did not realize that they had the option. This grief is part of growth. The following chapter, we will start to change the story more completely and transitioning to protection to possibility. We will examine the way emotional depth could be a strength and not a liability with the help of regulation and boundaries. Since being emotional is not something to put up with, it is intended to be lived using, in a purposeful, sustainable, and respectful manner towards the person who is carrying it. Chapter 11, when the sensibility is strength. Even long time, most deep feelers consider emotional depth as something that should be handled in a quiet way, as opposed to something that should be openly trusted. They get to know how to live with it, how to hold it, how to get its edges smooth so it does not attract too much attention. Strength, as they know it to be, refers to endurance. However, there is, as it were, a point, delicate in many cases, strenuous in most cases, when the question alters. How then can I cease to feel like this? But what, should this not be a fault at all? It is here it starts to change the narrative. By being managed and shielded by boundaries, it is something extraordinary when emotional depth is exposed and guarded. It ends the bombarding and begins the informing. It becomes insight, discernment, emotional intelligence. These advantages are already possessed by many deep feelers, and yet they are not conscious of them. They feel beneath other people what is going on. They understand complexity. They notice what is unsaid. They are able to have several points of view simultaneously. These are not small skills. Good leadership, worthwhile creativity, and genuine connection are anchored on them. There was a time that I worked with a person who had a great problem when it came to group work. They were tired, overstimulated, and lost. They have been thinking that over the years that this was an indication that they were ill-fitted to lead. However, after having learned of their sensitivity, something happened. They understood that they were able to read group dynamics rapidly, foresee conflict, and provide emotional safety to others. What they did not have was not talent. It was trust in their mode of operation. It is a strength because when it is trusted, it is sensitivity and not doubted. This is not to say that deep feelers have to get themselves in emotionally challenging positions. It implies that they are able to select places where their consciousness is appreciated and not abused. Emotional richness makes decisions made by people based on finesse and not emotion. It enables them to feel when there is a fault before it crashes altogether. It provides them with the ability to react in a considered manner rather than in a reactive manner. But this strength is only achieved when deep feelers cease to apologize their pace. Depth takes time. Insight takes reflection. Wisdom is rarely rushed. The biggest transformation deep feelers make is to learn to quit comparing their process to those of other people. They cease to compare themselves with norms that were made in other nervous systems. They give themselves permission to work, love, and live at a pace that facilitates clarity. This usually demands a redefinition of success. A deep feeler cannot always keep successful. It is sustainable interaction, the capacity to make contributions that are not depleting. People should be able to match their lives with their emotional makeup, and in this case, it will be their strength but not their weakness. Creativity flourishes. Relationships stabilize. The decisions are more grounded. This convergence is not achieved quickly. It requires self-trust. There are a good number of deep-feeling people who have been puzzled by their intuitions. They have suppressed their pain. They have disregarded warning signs. It takes time to regain confidence with oneself. It starts by listening. Not overlooking, but actually listening to internal signals. Suffering becomes knowledge. Fatigue becomes guidance. Emotional resonance is an understanding. This does not imply putting into action all the feelings. It includes giving the message the due respect in order to listen to it. Deep feelers tend to find an unspeakable confidence as they go to learn to incorporate their sensitivity. Not loud, not performative, but steady. They do not have to demonstrate their strength anymore. They cease imposing themselves into spaces which require hardness against authenticity. This is not withdrawal. It is discernment. In the following chapter, we shall examine the way of attending to emotional depth in a deliberate manner, in the form of self-care that works in the case of sensitive systems. Since strength is never created by ignoring needs. It is created through encounters with them, regularly, candidly, and unashamedly. Chapter 12, You Have to Treat Me Like You Mean Well. Several sensitive souls take care of themselves as an act of silent failure. They try what is recommended, they rest, they distract themselves, they take breaks. Nevertheless, there is still something wrong. They ask themselves why what appears to be of benefit to others hardly lifts them. The issue is not effort, it is mismatch. The majority of self-care directions is aimed at systems which release stress fast. Deep feelers do not. Their systems hold. They absorb. They need more than lip service care. To deep feelers, rest is not physical. It is emotional and sensory. The whole night of sleep might not return somebody whose nervous system has been receiving emotional information all day to its senses. Real rest can hardly be achieved without stimulation, not idle. Silence, alone, and certainty. This does not mean isolation. It refers to deliberate distance in which the input of emotions is restricted. Most deep feelers find this difficult since they associate being alone with being withdrawn. They are afraid of being out of touch. However, when voluntary, loneliness is not disconnection. It is recalibration. Journaling can be a useful process, but not in the sense of a productivity process, but a means of containing emotion. Writing enables sentiments to come out of the body and into the page. It brings separation without refusal. This is a similar role played by creative expression. Art, music, movement, these enable to process emotional energy without having to use words. To deep feelers, a hobby is not creativity. It is regulation. Another area that has been neglected is sensory care. Deep feelers tend to be sensitive to noise, light, and chaos. Emotional load can be greatly reduced through the management of sensory environments, through low levels in light, reduced noise levels, comfortable textures, and so on. This is not indulgence. It is nervous system care. There is also emotional self-care, which is the decision not to work on. Sensitive systems can be flooded with news cycles, social media, and content that is emotionally charged. Deep feelers have to filter the input. This involves abandoning the notion that being informed is being exposed all the time. Recovery time is another very important factor in maintaining emotional depth. Deep feelers usually will switch their emotional need in betweenness. They do not have transition between work and relationship to responsibilities. Transitions and decompression is important. Restructuring the system requires establishing little rituals in between activities, walking, breathing, silence to reset the system. Deep feelers must take care of themselves cumulatively. Minor, regular practices are more important than large-scale gestures every now and then. Notably, compassion is also a part of care. There are a great many of deep feelers that thrust themselves. They are in need of unbroken toughness. They condemn themselves as in need of what they need. This inner tone matters. Patience in talking to oneself is not a weakness. It is regulation. When deep feelers learn to take proper care of themselves, something changes. They cease to be in the state of continuous recuperation with life and begin to engage in it with more intensity. Self-acceptance is another concept that we shall examine in the following chapter as a practice. It is a hard task to take care of yourself when you are still struggling to be the person you are. And to be a profound feeler is not the goal. It is the beginning of all that comes after that. Chapter 13, being a learning to accept the way you are. Self-acceptance is a misconception, mostly viewed as some sort of endpoint, a point at which all the things will at once seem resolved and definite. To deep feelers, acceptance may seem unattainable with this misconception. They wait until they are less responsive, less dramatic, less influenced to think that they deserve peace. Change, however, does not bring self-acceptance. It comes in hand with sincerity. The negotiation between the individual and the self is a years-long process by which many deep people have been negotiating. On a good day, they go along with their sensitiveness, and on the bad day, they condemn it. They embrace the aspects of themselves on a conditional basis. I am okay as long as I am not too much. This conditional acquiescence is stressing. Real acceptance of self starts by the realization of that emotional depth is not the stage that one grows out of. It is a temperament, a wiring. There is a regular trend that should be admired and not opposed. I had once a colleague who would express that, I keep on waiting to become easier. There was years of self-disqualification in that sentence. They thought that their life would start after they were not so influenced by anything. But the fact is, life had been going on all this time only through the filter of shame. Acceptance does not imply liking all of yourself at all times. It consists in quitting the inner debate as to whether you ought not to be different. In the case of deep feelers, this usually includes mourning over the illusion of becoming emotionally simple. Defining hope as the possibility that one day one will feel without too much notice or stay. Acceptance involves grief. When this is recognized as a grieving, something becomes open. The energy, which was used in fighting reality before, is used to live. Self-acceptance is turned into a routine. It manifests itself in insignificant choices. Selecting environments that can be suited to you, respecting your speed, saying no without infecting yourself. Also shows up in self-talk. Deep feelers need to be taught to talk to themselves without being judgmental. They start asking, what do I need right now instead of why am I like this? This is a change that is not very apparent. Acceptance enables the deep feelers to accept blame. They get to know how to control their emotional lives without making themselves the problem. They no longer gauge their value using the emotional intensity. They have no more reason to apologize that they need space, clarity, or time. Notably, agreeing does not imply to rest. Growth still happens. Skills are still learned. Patterns are still refined. The distinction is motivation. Self-rejection-based growth is punishing. The growth based on acceptance is sustainable. The more deeply a deep feeler accepts himself or herself, the more he/she notices enhanced confidence. Not less because they feel less, but more because they have more confidence of themselves. They are no longer afraid of their depth. The following chapter will be about relationships, the way deep feelers relate and bind, and even become lost in relationship. Since acceptance in yourself alters your relation with other people. And the ability to remain intact in relationships is amongst the most valuable skills that a deep feeler can acquire. Chapter 14, Being Yourself in Your Relationships Without Losing Yourself. Deep feelers tend to lose themselves in relationships not because they are deprived of identity, but because they have the sense of connection. Love, attachment, and emotional closeness are not coming soft. They flood. They pull attention outward. They make the inner world of one person as significant as the inner world of another person, sometimes more important. Numerous empathizers are raised with the idea that intimacy needs to be accommodated. He or she is aware of what others require and changes. This sensitivity is eventually a matter of self-abandonment. They are not out to fade away. They just have a preference of harmony, above all, honesty. I have also talked to a lot of people who were able to detail the feelings of their partners and were unable to express their feelings. They were heavily invested, but oddly not in touch with themselves. This occurs when self-consciousness is substituted with emotional responsiveness. Love and responsibility are mixed up as often by deep feelers. They believe that they are responsible to others' moods, healing, and happiness. When things are not going well in the relationships, they look inwards first. What have I done wrong? This reflex is explicable. What should I fix? They are sensitive and thus they are receptive to relational changes. However, in absence of balance, it generates inequality. Healthy relationships involve two complete entities and not the emotional burden of one person. One of the ways of remaining oneself in relationships is through internal contact. It involves the practice of being in touch with your personal feelings as opposed to those of another. It is also letting it hurt. Deep feelers do not express needs much since they are afraid of interfering with connection. Silence does not maintain intimacy. It erodes it quietly. Of particular concern here are boundaries as explained above. Not like fences, but like cords. It is possible to love so much without fusing fully, and you can nurture without assimilating. You may be there without vanishing. Effective communication becomes important. Deep feelers tend to believe that others would feel the same as they do. Failure to make this happen makes them feel invisible. It is a skill to learn how to speak out, even clumsily. Not all people communicate the language of nuance. The other valuable behavior in remaining yourself is the identification of overgiving patterns. Deep feelers are likely to be supportive before one requests them to be so, in an attempt to avoid pain or conflict. Although this is generous, it may bring dependency and exhaustion. A time gap before making a gift is not denying it. It is self-respect. Relationships that regard deep feelers enable a space that is not demanding. They respect emotional honesty without anticipating to be available always. These relationships are present, but they are more readily available to you when you desist in over-functioning in the unhealthy relationships. Being yourself also involves the ability to know when a relationship needs excessive self-suppression. To be small should not be done in love. It is a painful realization. Lots of deep feelers would stick with relationships long after they cease to be sustaining on the assumption that endurance is loyalty. However, nothing should demand loyalty to other people at the expense of personal loyalty. Connection is safer as deep feelers are trained to remain on the ground in relationships. Less dramatic, more stable. Releasing is usually depicted as an abrupt gesture, as something done in a tidy, confident, and unambivalent way. Unless to deep feelers, letting go seldom appears the like. It is gradual, emotional, sometimes circular. They revisit memories. They replay conversations. They mourn the past, the might have been. This does not imply that they are feeble. It implies that they bind themselves with significance. Deep feelers are not easy to release since they put their money in it. They do not experience people, roles, and identities as surface. They are ingested into their inner world. When the fit is lost, it is experienced internally and has to be felt externally. I have observed too many deep feelers in situations which exhausted them remain too long, not because they did not know how expensive it would be, but because they found it like cutting a part of themselves away. Releasing, therefore, involves restructuring. You are not erasing yourself. You are reclaiming yourself. This is a change that is nuanced but nonetheless transformative. Releasing starts with truthfulness, the ability to come to terms with the fact that something is no longer consistent, but it used to be. Deep feelers tend to cling on to the old form of a relationship, in the hope that it will come back. But growth changes people. What previously seemed sustaining might start to be oppressive. The recognition of this does not nullify what has been told. It gives a salute to the reality of the here and now. Here, grief is at the center stage. Deep feelers should permit themselves to grieve their loss, and not hastily, and without interruptions of self-blame. The inability to get on is not grief. It is a sign of depth. Grief is not cut down by the process of suppression. It prolongs it. Releasing roles also goes hand in hand with letting go. Numerous deep feelers have cultivated around the notion of being needed, trustworthy, emotionally strong. These positions bring sense and sometimes at a personal expense. It is unbalancing to leave these roles. Who are you when you are not the one that holds everything together anymore? This is a frightening question. But what comes forth on the other side is authenticity, self that does not ascribe itself to service. It is not necessary to make dramatic exits always to let go. At times it involves setting expectations aside, lessening effective investment, releasing the need to fix. At other moments it really means walking away, slowly, intelligently, and kindly. Deep feelers should be taught that ends do not mean ends, they complete it. New clarity comes with space opening. Energy returns. Creativity reawakens. Letting go creates room. The following chapter will discuss rebuilding, how deep feelers start again after discharge. It is not the end of the story because letting go. It is the stop before something more corresponding comes to shape. Chapter 15, Becoming at Home in Yourself. Then once released, a silent period usually ensues, a period where nothing in the moment jumps up to fill the gap that has been created. To most serious sentimentalists, this is a foreign ground, even unsettling. They are used to fullness, to emotional engagement, to have a direction towards a thing or a person. And so when it all comes away, they all ask, what now? The chapter dwells in that area. It is not dramatic to become at home in yourself. It does not proclaim itself with certitude and confidence. It at first is gentle, hardly felt, at times when you no longer have the desire to justify yourself, to others or to yourself. Deep feelers tend to live an outwardly based life. The stability they have is through role, relationship, and responsibility. As soon as they become loose, they are sucked in. This initially can be loneliness. Loneliness is absence. She is alone, alone with herself. The art of staying with yourself is one of the lessons that most deep feelers were never taught. They were taught to go to others much earlier than they were taught how to sit with their inner world without being judgmental. I have talked to individuals who replied, "I do not know who I am when I am not required." That statement shows the extent to which identity might be functionalized. To be a home in yourself is to make a distinction between value and utility. It is finding out who you are when you are not acting, propping, healing, or bearing. This is not a finding at first glance. It is done gradually, by attentiveness. Care about what you want, to your tunes, to what gives silent pleasure instead of applause. This stage can be characterized by a realignment of values. Deep feelers start paying attention to what really feeds them as compared to what is just a distractor. They choose depth over noise, meaning over momentum. Things here are quite often tender, and it is an encounter with unattended parts of the self, younger parts, quieter parts, sections that early on learnt to wait. Delicacy is needed to fulfill these sections. You can find yourself having emotions that you had before gotten overwhelmed by activity. Sadness, relief, anger, gratitude. These are no signs of retrogression. They are signs of safety. When less threat is being felt by the nervous system, it enables the stored emotions to flow. It is also a process of becoming at home with yourself and establishing internal trust. You start thinking that you are capable of managing your emotions without entrusting them to other people. You get to know that you will listen when something wrong, that you will not answer it carelessly. Everything is different with this trust. You no longer feel the need to fill silence. You no longer have what is not in line. You are no longer afraid of your profundity. You begin to feel rooted. This does not imply that life is easy. Challenges still arise. Emotions are still felt bitterly at times. Nevertheless, there is stabilization beneath, a feeling that you are no longer in conflict with you. This inner conformity is where all the other grow out of it. At the end, we will come to the end of the journey where we will look at what it really means to be deep in a world that tend to reward the absence of emotion, not as a burden to overcome, but as an attitude of being, which when comprehended and respected becomes one of your strongest assets. Conclusion: you must have got thus far, probably because something in these pages reminded you of yourself. Not dramatic in any sense, but in the sense of being perceived rightly. The type which makes no flattering, no diminution, but speaks the truth. The issue was never wanting to feel everything. The issue was to live in the world where emotional depth is something people do not learn how to apply skillfully, respectfully, and even caringly. In this book, we have made no attempt to desensitize you. We have followed it where it started, where it molded you, where it conquered you, and where it shielded you impedimental. We have discussed the price of not knowing it and the relief that follows the eventual realization of the same. What comes about is something basic but very deep. That emotional richness must be organized, not repressed. The feelings that were not backed up made you heavy. They were in overwhelming numbers when they were unguarded. In case they were not understood, they became something shameful. And when you learnt to control, to draw limits, to take care of yourself straight, to be able to take yourself the way you are, something changed. Depth became clarity. Discernment was made sensitivity. Feeling became knowing. You had no weakness in loving. You were untrained. This is one realization that can change the way you go. Now you know that emotions are not instructions, they are information. It is not that caring involves erasing the self. That love does not require long suffering at the expense of being real. That boundaries are not dispossession, but becomes a proposal of wellness togetherness. Above all, you have learned that you do not need to be less so as to fit, to harden, to numb, or shrink. You need not be. What you must have is congruence with your nervous system, your values, your timing, and your truth. It does not mean that you should always be on the intensity of living as a deep feeler. It is living consciously. Selecting the environments that favor you, relationships that honor you, rhythms that sustain you. It is concerning the ability to know when to work and when to take a break, why to be tenacious and why to give up, when it is better to speak and when it is better to remain silent, not because of fear, but choice. Sometimes there will be days when emotions will come at the same time, when the world feels loud, when old patterns resurface. This is not an indication that you have not accomplished it. It means you are human, but now you have tools, language, understanding. And maybe you see pity to yourself. Take that sympathy with you. Let it inform your decisions. Allow it to soothe your inner voice. And not to apologize that depth is in no way something to be ashamed of. You were never too much. You were simply someone who feels, and now someone who knows how to live with that truth.